Alright, keep working on creating your diffuse map. I'm just going to show my process up here if you guys want to see what I'm doing and follow along. But please work on your own time. Take up the time to make your diffuse map. And then when I get to the point where it's time to make the bump map, I'll call your attention up front again so you guys see how to create the specular and bump maps from your diffuse maps. Make a digital box and take a physical one. Okay, so once you guys get to a point where you have a lot of your texture on there, you can duplicate your bottom brown layer that you created. And I know this is in the video, so you guys can see this in the video as well, but I'll duplicate that bottom layer that I made and put it on top. And then I'm going to use the multiply blend mode and change the opacity down just so I can apply kind of that like brown color that I want to my tree. Okay, so I'm changing how this layer is affecting the layer underneath it by using this multiply mode. And then when I'm happy with how my diffuse map looks, I'm going to make sure it's all merged together onto one layer. Wait to do this until you're happy with where you're at and you don't want to edit anything else. I'm going to merge those layers and call this my diffuse layer. Alright, and then I have my images in that layer. You don't need them in there. In fact, I'm actually going to pull those out of there using this lasso selection tool just so that they are out of the way. Not that it matters either direction because that's not on the part of my UV map that shows up anyways, but I'm going to just cut those out of that layer so that they are out of the way. Okay, so now I have my diffuse layer and it looks really messy. That's totally fine because the actual UV shell that exists isn't going to go all the way to the edge. So if you can see that, I think, let's see, I don't know if you guys can see it up there because the green doesn't show up as well. But my UV shell basically fits within entirely this part of my map. So this is my diffuse layer, and I'm going to export that. So export as that layer. I'm going to export it as a PNG, that works, and then save it to my H drive. And just call this tree diffuse. All right, and then apply it back to your model. So some of you guys have already gone through that process of reapplying that to your model. After you've applied it to your model and you like how it looks, let me show you guys how to create in Photoshop the specular map. Okay, so we're going to create an adjustment layer in Photoshop that turns this from a color map to a black and white grayscale map, because that's what our specular maps are. So I am going to go to layer and then new adjustment layer, and I'm going to add a black and white adjustment layer on top of my objects. Okay, and this can be edited in properties. So if you want to change how dark the reds are or how bright the yellows are, you can affect that in properties, but this is a black and white layer essentially. And then I'm going to just make a copy of my diffuse map, and I'm just going to make a copy of this black and white layer too actually, and I will merge these two layers together. So now I have a specular map, which is just this kind of grayscale version of my diffuse map. A little bit darker though because trees aren't very shiny. So I like editing down the black and white so that it even appears even darker when you export it. Let's see, like if this was my diffuse, you can edit down some of those layers just to darken it up, because the specular map, that's our gloss map, and we don't want our tree trunk to be super shiny anyways. For the bump map though, we do. So that's why I duplicated that black and white layer. That one I did as my specular map. I think I'm happy with how dark and light that looks. For my bump map, I am going to duplicate my diffuse layer again. And I have this black and white layer copy that I already made, and this one I'm going to adjust up a little. So I want a little bit more contrast between the lights and darks. And I'm kind of just playing with some of the color settings. A lot of these won't do anything because we don't have that color in our map, but I'm going to pull those yellows up and then the reds right around there. Okay, and this is going to be my bump map. So it's like the diffuse map. It's really similar, but it's just like a slightly lighter version in this case because we want our tree bark to stand out. So I'm going to merge these two layers, and I'm going to call this one my bump map. Okay, and then I'll export both of those as well. So I'm going to export the specular map as PNG or JPEG, either of those works, and then the bump map as well. Respec. Right click on the layer to export it. And now I'm exporting this as my tree bump. Alright. Okay, now I'm going to open up Maya and apply those textures. Okay, so you'll assign the diffuse map to the color area of your material, and then you'll just assign the specular map to the specular color area of your material. And then for the bump map, you can go to the geometry area, and then there's this bump mapping portion, and that's where you're going to add that bump file. It says use as bump, and we're going to add it to the bump value, and that's where you add your bump map. Oops. So that's going to be your tree bump map. Okay, and then my diffuse map is really dark for my tree, so you guys can't see it very well. I'm going to change that on my end so it's a little easier for you guys to see that. So I'm just going to grab my diffuse map and brighten up my diffuse map a little bit with a brightness layer. That way it's a little bit easier for you guys to see. But once you've added your bump map, you can kind of start to see the shadow texture come in. And then if you do hotkey 3, that'll show you the kind of curved preview of your model. But the bump map is really what's adding kind of that illusion of actual texture. Okay. So after you've added those 3 maps, go ahead and add as many leaves as you want, and then set up a little lighting scheme and render a snapshot of your tree. And that's what you're going to be submitting. So you'll submit the Maya Lab 7 file, and you'll also submit a render of your tree with all of your leaves put around your tree and your bump and diffuse and specular maps applied to your tree. All right, any questions about that? Okay, if you guys want